Welcome to today's historical deep dive, brought to you by Sleepy History, where we uncover the echoes of lives long past, not in the marble halls of kings, but in the mud and struggle of the ordinary. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin, and live the life they never got to finish. You wake not to an alarm, but to the gnawing ache in your gut, a dull, ever-present hunger that makes each morning a calculation of scarcity. Beside you, nestled in the shared straw pallet, the youngest coughs, a thin, rasping sound that echoes in the quiet. Damp air of the single room. The fire, banked hopefully last night, is a dead pile of ash, gray and cold like the breath you just exhaled. Your hands, calloused, cracked and stiff with the chill that permeates everything, fumble for the edge of the rough wool blanket, more of a scratchy hide against the elements than true comfort, pulling it closer against the persistent dampness that seems to weep from the wattle and daub walls themselves. The air hangs thick with the smell of stale wood smoke, the ever-present scent of damp earth, and the comforting, yet sometimes overwhelming, proximity of the livestock stirring just beyond the thin timber partition. Outside, the first faint light of dawn is a pale gray promise the body, weary even from sleep, finds hard to believe. You are 14 years old, maybe 16. No one is entirely sure of the year you were born, as the priest only comes maybe twice a year to mark such things, if he remembers. But your age is irrelevant. You are already expected to work with the strength and endurance of any adult. Survival isn't a concept discussed around a warm hearth. It's the immediate, demanding reality woven into the fabric of each rough wool thread, each shallow breath, each aching joint. Pushing yourself up from the straw pallet, your muscles protesting the cold and the previous day's ceaseless labor, you move towards the cold hearth. In places on the underside of the roof thatch, the frost is visible, a cruel beauty hinting at the permeable nature of your shelter against the biting air. You gather kindling with numb fingers, searching for dry scraps among the damp wood. The quiet, deep-seated desperation of starting the day's struggle already settling in your chest. You pray silently, more from habit and a deep-seated fear of misfortune than true piety, that the tinder will catch. Life begins here, with the most basic physical needs: warmth, food, shelter. Needs that are never guaranteed, that must be fought for anew each day. Existence isn't measured in ambitious plans or future dreams, but in the immediate battle against the cold that seeks to steal your warmth, the hunger that hollows your belly, and the fatigue that is your constant companion. We begin life today with a security in basic needs that most medieval people could only dream of, a luxury so profound it's invisible to us. Does this shield us from fundamental truths about human vulnerability? What does it truly mean to face survival so nakedly each morning without the vast safety nets we now take for granted? She lights a candle for her stillborn daughter, not because it changes the past, it cannot, but because it calms the whispers in the dark corners of the mind. You wake in the deep, starless black before dawn. Your breath is a ragged fog in the air. Beside you, curled tight under rough wool blankets, itchy with straw, your family sleeps. Your wife, your children, maybe an aging parent. The air bites at your exposed skin. The fire, the heart of this single-room dwelling, has died to embers hours ago. This is home. 4 low walls, maybe of wattle and daub, or fieldstone mortared with mud. A roof of thick thatch, home to spiders and mice, hopefully keeping out the worst of the rain and snow. Underfoot is the cold, unforgiving packed earth. A single opening serves as door, and often the only window. A simple gap, shuttered against the night. There is no glass, no barrier between your life and the raw elements except wood and straw and mud. Slowly, stiffly, you rise. The cold bites deeper now. You crouch by the hearth, a central pit where the logs lay in ash. Finding a glowing coal takes careful prodding in the dark. A twig catches, then dry grass, then kindling. A spark of life in the gloom. Smoke, thick and acrid, begins to swirl upwards. It finds the smoke hole in the roof, or simply hangs in the air, stinging your eyes, clinging to your clothes, pickling your lungs. But that smoke is life too. It warms the space, chases the damp, and up in the rafters, where precious cuts of meat might hang, a rare luxury, it preserves against rot. As the fire grows, the room takes on a dim, flickering life. Your family stirs. There is no going to another room, no closing a door for privacy. Every snore, every cough, every whispered word in the night is shared. Your few possessions are visible to all. A heavy iron pot hanging over the fire, wooden bowls and spoons, straw pallets on the floor that serve as beds, the rough-spun tunics and hose that are likely the only clothes you own besides what you wear. A sack of grain, a tool or two. That is the sum of your material wealth. Huddled now around the newly kindled fire, the closest thing to comforts you know, you share the morning meal, a thin pottage, perhaps, made from whatever grain is available, maybe bulked out with foraged greens or roots. The smoke swirls, thick and blue, catching in the firelight. Your children lean against you. Your wife's shoulder presses yours. There is an undeniable warmth in their presence, a bulwark against the vast, cold, dangerous world outside. But it is also a constant, inescapable presence. There is no corner here truly your own, no moment of solitude, save perhaps a walk in the fields or woods. This medieval home is not a sanctuary of personal space or a display of possessions. It is, first and foremost, essential shelter. It is a place of shared struggle against the elements, against hunger, against illness that moves swiftly through crowded, smoky air. Life is lived communally. The boundaries between labor, rest, and family life completely blurred. The same space where you sleep is where you eat, where you mend clothes, where you might even bring a sick lamb during a brutal winter. The privacy we cherish is a foreign concept. Your life, from waking to sleeping, is an open book to those you share these walls with. There is a surprising insight here. The sheer necessity of this closeness forged different bonds. You relied utterly on those in your immediate circle for survival. The idea of a family unit was less about emotional self-discovery and more about a mutual aid society. The boundaries weren't just physical, they were psychological. You learned to live with people, not just alongside them. The hearth wasn't just a source of heat. It was the magnetic center of existence, pulling everyone into its orbit, forcing connection, for better and for worse. The irony: this constant proximity could breed deep loyalty and comfort, or it could amplify petty tensions and resentments with no escape valve. Ask yourself, if your entire life was contained within these smoky walls, shared with everyone you loved and sometimes endured, what would become of the private thoughts you hoard today? What is gained when the boundaries between family, labor, and rest are non-existent compared to our modern, sharply delineated lives? Is our personal space a luxury bought at the cost of a certain fundamental, inescapable human bond? You live cheek by jowl with the reality of life and death, with the smell of bodies and animals and smoke and damp earth. This is the foundation from which everything else must rise. You chew slowly on the small piece of dry bread, crumbling it in your mouth, trying to make its meager substance last. It tastes of grit and old flour, a pale shadow of sustenance. But this is your meal, perhaps the only substantial thing you'll eat today. Hunger isn't an occasional inconvenience here. It's a dull, persistent ache, a constant companion that settles in your belly the moment you wake. Your diet is relentlessly monotonous, mostly grain in the form of thick, flavorless pottage or coarse, heavy bread like this. Maybe some boiled beans or tough root vegetables if the season has been kind and you have access to a small plot or a generous lord. Meat is a rarity, a feast day luxury, or a tough, leathery chew preserved with salt or dried until brittle. A communal slaughter after the harvest, or the rare luck of poaching a rabbit, provides a brief, glorious respite, a memory to cling to during the lean times. But mostly it is grain, just enough to keep you upright, barely. The fear of the harvest failing is a shadow that never fully lifts. You watch the sky daily, dreading the blight, the sudden frost, the plague that weakens the laborers, the storm that flattens the stalks. Every rumor of poor yield in a neighboring village sends a cold knot of dread through you. What if the winter stores run out before spring? That isn't just hardship, that is the end. You offer prayers to saints for good weather, fearing that sin in the community could invoke God's wrath upon the crops, inviting a different kind of plague. The devil, they say, delights in spoiling God's bounty. You see his work in every withered leaf, every pestilent swarm. It's an exhausting vigilance, combining piety and raw physical fear. This state of being reveals a profound truth. Food is the central precarious axis of life. Every decision, every day's backbreaking labor in the fields, spinning wool, or tending livestock is fundamentally, brutally about securing enough calories to survive until the next season. It simplifies life down to its most urgent animal necessity. Wealth is measured in bushels of grain. Security is a full granary. Anything else, comfort, learning, even time for quiet thought, is a luxury built upon the bedrock of a fed stomach. We live in a world of unparalleled food access and choice. Has the absence of true, grinding food insecurity made us forget our fundamental reliance on the earth and the labor it takes to feed us? What would chronic hunger teach us about necessity, about gratitude for the simple loaf, about the sheer, tenacious will required just to endure? Bent double in the field, the sun a hammer on your back, your fingers are cracked and calloused, stained permanently with the color of turned earth. This isn't just dirt. It is the raw stuff of your existence, the unyielding, fertile womb from which life struggles forth, or fails to. You pull weeds, stubborn invaders choking the young barley. The ache is deep, a constant companion in your lower back, a legacy of endless seasons, stooping, lifting, pushing the heavy wooden plow pulled by the village's shared oxen, or perhaps just a worn hoe. The work is relentless, dictated not by whim or ambition, but by the sun's arc, the chilling bite of autumn air, the desperate hope for spring rains, the rhythmic demands of tradition passed down through whispers and calloused hands. You know the feel of the soil beneath your bare feet, the gritty sand in one patch, the heavy clay in another, the cool, dark loam that promises bounty. You scan the horizon for the precise shade of cloud that signals coming rain, or dread the relentless, brassy sky of drought. The stubbornness of weeds is a personal insult. Their unchecked growth feels like a direct threat to your children's bellies come winter. There is no abstraction here. Life is measured in bushels of grain, in the health of a single cow, in the yield of a small patch of land that must feed a family. Your world shrinks to this field, this village, the brutal beauty of the seasons. The rhythms of growth and decay aren't distant concepts. They are the very pulse you live by. A blight upon the wheat isn't a distant problem. It is potentially starvation knocking at your door, a colder, crueler plague than any that sweeps through the towns. Your prayers rise to the saints, not just for spiritual salvation, but for earthly survival. For enough sun, not too much rain, for the crops to hold until harvest. This intimate, utterly dependent connection to the natural world grounds every thought, every fear, every small joy. Your existence is a cycle mirroring the earth's own. Desperate planting, a hopeful growth, a brutal struggle against pests and weather, a precarious harvest, and then the lean, cold quiet of winter, praying for the cycle to begin anew. It is a life lived in exquisite vulnerability, a constant negotiation with forces far larger, far more powerful than any human can truly control. It shapes your view of God, of fate, of your place in the universe. The superstition that a child born in famine years might have a cold heart feels less like folklore and more like grim potential truth. Our modern lives, buffered by concrete and grocery stores, are so often disconnected from the sources of our sustenance, from the primal cycles of nature. Does this separation, this insulation from brute necessity, make us less resilient, less grounded? Or does it simply free us from a different kind of chain? The one that bound a medieval soul utterly, physically, to the soil, demanding everything in return for mere survival. You heft the sack higher onto your shoulder, the rough Hessian scraping against your homespun tunic. It's heavy, heavier than it looks, filled with the wheat you threshed, winnowed, and prayed over through the long months. This isn't all of it, not even close. A large portion sits in piles back at your cottage, the bare minimum needed to see your family through the next winter, God willing. But this sack, this precious, heavy sack, is not yours, not truly. It belongs to the Lord of the manor. You join the shuffling line of villagers, each bearing their tribute: sacks of grain, bundles of straw, squawking chickens clutched tight, baskets of eggs carefully balanced. You don't own the land you work, the field where you sweated under the summer sun and shivered through the spring rains. It belongs to Him. And your life, your very ability to eat and survive, is tied to Him by invisible bonds of obligation. This harvest is your rent, paid not in silver coin, which you rarely see, but in the fruits of your own desperate labor. The steward stands by the wide doors of the manor storehouse, a figure of imposing authority draped in better cloth than you will ever wear. His face is a mask of practiced indifference as he directs men to weigh the grain, count the livestock. His eyes flick over your load, assessing its worth with a glance. This man is the Lord's hand, his voice often law in the absence of his master. His word decides if your tribute is sufficient, if you have met your obligations. There is no appeal, no argument. This is the structure of your world. You must bring your grain to his mill to be ground, paying a portion back to him for the privilege. Your bread must be baked in his communal oven, incurring yet another fee. Every fundamental step of feeding yourself is controlled, measured, and taxed by the man who holds dominion over the earth beneath your feet. As you set the sat down with a grunt, feeling the familiar bitter ache in your back, a quiet resentment stirs beneath the surface of your resignation. You poured your life into this field, endured the caprices of weather and the constant threat of blight, only for a significant portion to be claimed by a man who likely spent the harvest season hunting or feasting. It's a cruel irony. Your survival depends on endless toil, but the abundance you create primarily serves another. This stark power imbalance is the invisible cage of medieval peasant life. Personal liberty is a concept as foreign as the fabled cities of the East. Obligations to the Lord and the unchanging patterns of tradition shape your life far more profoundly than any individual choice you might make. Your path was set the moment you were born onto his land. We chafe against taxes, lament bureaucracy, and argue over regulations. But imagine a system where one person held direct, almost absolute power over your ability to feed yourself, shelter your family, and even grind the grain for your next meal. There is no escaping this hierarchy. It is as fixed and unyielding as the seasons, dictating the rhythm of your days from dawn until dusk, from birth until you are buried in the Lord's ground. What modern systems, perhaps less visible, perhaps less personal, exert a similar foundational control over the most basic needs and potential of our lives? Welcome to today's historical deep dive, where we don't just tell you about the past. We invite you to feel its dust, taste its fear, and understand the quiet resilience that built the foundations of our own time. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague because the priest said so, and the priest speaks for God. The only clock is the sun, and the only map is the path your grandfather walked. Your future is not written in stars, but in the whims of a lord, the temper of the weather, and the fragile strength of your own body. Welcome to the Middle Ages. This isn't a fairy tale of knights and castles. Not for most. This is the ground level, the mud-caked, bone-weary reality of life lived moment by moment, under skies that could promise feast or famine, salvation or swift, terrifying death. This is the sleepy history approach, peeling back the centuries to reveal the pulsing, messy, deeply human heart of vanished eras. We look for the people whose names were never carved in stone, whose stories were whispered around dying fires, carried only in the collective memory of a village before fading into the earth. They navigated a world governed by cycles of nature, rigid social structures, pervasive belief in the unseen, and the constant, gnawing need simply to survive until tomorrow. Their struggles and small triumphs shaped the very soil beneath our feet, even as we forget the feel of it between our fingers. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know, allowing us to keep digging into these incredible human histories. And as we journey back, drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Would you be the miller, the weaver, the priest, the peasant tilling the Lord's fields? Would your faith be your shield, or your fear your constant shadow? We're about to step across a threshold, back into a world that feels alien, yet is closer to us than we might imagine. We'll explore the dirt beneath their nails, the prayers on their lips, the aches in their bones, and the faint echo of their existence that still resonates today. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. Your breath mists the air inside the small hut. The fire is out, leaving only cold gray ash and the memory of warmth. Beside you, your youngest coughs again. The home is less a shield than a skin, thin against the biting wind that finds every crack in the wattle and daub walls. Smoke from the central hearth, when it's lit, has no chimney, only a hole in the thatched roof, leaving everything coated in a layer of soot, preserving the wood but staining lungs. You share this space not just with your family, huddled together on straw-filled pallets, but with the goat, maybe a chicken, their body heat a small mercy in the perpetual chill. There is no privacy here, no quiet corner for thought. Every birth, every death, every argument, every moment of intimacy happens with the world outside feels impossibly vast and dangerous, but the world inside is suffocatingly small and intensely communal. Survival hinges on this shared space, on the animal warmth and the human bond, but also on the constant vulnerability it exposes. A spark from the fire could consume everything in minutes. A sickness carried in by one could sweep through the entire family huddled together. The medieval home is a lesson in both interdependence and fragility. There is no retreat, only shared endurance. You sleep head to toe for warmth, your dreams tangled with the low bleating of the animal beside you, the restless stirrings of children. This shared life, this lack of personal space, shapes relationships in ways we can barely grasp. There is an enforced intimacy, a reliance on patience and tolerance, or a life filled with inescapable friction. It makes you consider our modern need for solitude, for personal boundaries. In this world, those luxuries simply don't exist. Your very breath mixes with that of your family, your livestock, the cold earth floor. The concept of my space is nonsensical. It's our space, our shared struggle for warmth and safety against the vast, cold indifference of the outside world. Your only true solitude might be found kneeling in the church, or perhaps, chillingly, in the lonely contemplation of death. The irony? While they craved shelter and community against overwhelming external threats, their refuge was also their greatest vulnerability to internal ones. Sickness, conflict, the inescapable irritation of constant proximity. Ask yourself, in a world where your home offered no escape, no real privacy, how would you maintain your sanity, your identity? Would the forced togetherness forge unbreakable bonds, or simply wear away at the nerves until something snapped? Was the lack of physical space compensated by a greater acceptance of shared fate, or did it breed resentment beneath the surface of enforced calm? You live on top of one another, breathe the same air thick with smoke and animal scent. This is the foundation of existence, a fragile box against the storm. The churn of your stomach is the first clock. It wakes you before the pale dawn touches the horizon. Hunger is not just an absence, it is a physical presence, a constant companion, sometimes a dull ache, sometimes a sharp claw. Life is dictated by the rhythms of growth, the stubborn refusal of the earth to yield sustenance without relentless toil, and the terrifying power of the sky to withhold rain or send hail that shatters a year's hope. The grain is king: wheat, barley, rye, oats, boiled into pottage, baked into hard bread. Meat is a luxury. Vegetables are seasonal and often bitter or tough. You understand the year, not by months, but by the agricultural cycle. Plowing in the early spring, sowing when the ground is ready, weeding under the summer sun, the desperate race of harvest before the autumn rains rot the crop, threshing through the long, cold winter. Every phase is fraught with anxiety. A late frost can kill the tender shoots. A summer drought can wither the ripening grain. Pests can devour the stored surplus. A bad harvest isn't just a financial setback, it's a death sentence for the weakest. A period of gnawing hunger for everyone. This precarious relationship with food shapes morality, belief, and social structure. Greed for land, conflict over water rights, the harshness of laws against poaching, they stem directly from the razor's edge of survival. The blessing of the harvest, the prayers for rain, the thanks offered to saints associated with agriculture. They are not abstract rituals, but desperate pleas born of existential terror. The Church's calendar is punctuated by rogation days, where processions walk the field boundaries, praying for God's favor over the crops. Was it faith that brought the harvest, or simply the timely arrival of rain and sun? The medieval mind didn't separate them. Good fortune was God's favor. Bad fortune, His wrath, or the work of malevolent forces. There's a dark irony in their relationship with food. They toiled endlessly for it, lived constantly on the brink of its absence, yet often consumed a diet lacking essential nutrients, riddled with contaminants. Ergot fungus in the rye could cause terrifying hallucinations and gangrene. Unsanitary conditions meant foodborne illnesses were common. The very thing that kept them alive could also poison them slowly. The simple act of eating was an act of faith, a gamble with unseen forces both natural and, they believed, supernatural. Reflect on your own pantry, your grocery store aisles. Food is an endless given, a matter of choice, not survival. Could you look at a field of wheat and see not just grain, but life itself? The difference between eating and starving, between your children living or succumbing. Would you still see God's hand in the weather? Or would you rage against a purely indifferent natural world? For them, the land was a fickle deity, demanding sweat and prayer in equal measure, granting survival grudgingly, always retaining the power to snatch it away without mercy. Hunger was the constant, sharp reminder of who was truly in control. She lights a candle for her stillborn daughter, not because it changes the past, but because it calms the whispers. Not just the whispers of grief in her own mind, but the village whispers about ill omens, about sins that might have brought God's displeasure, about the chilling possibility of something darker, something wrong. Sickness is a constant presence, a predator stalking the vulnerable, especially the young and the old. Without understanding of germs or sanitation, even a simple cut can fester into a fatal infection. A cough can turn into a death rattle. Childbirth is a perilous journey, often ending in tragedy for mother, child, or both. Their understanding of the body is a blend of ancient humoral theory, imbalance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and deeply ingrained religious or superstitious beliefs. Illness might be a test from God, a punishment for sin, a demonic possession, or the result of an evil eye cast by an envious neighbor. Treatment reflects this chaotic blend. A doctor, if one is even accessible, unlikely for peasants, might prescribe bleeding or purging to rebalance humors. More commonly, you rely on the village wise woman with her knowledge of herbs, poultices of comfrey for broken bones, willow bark for pain, remedies passed down through generations. Alongside the practical, there are charms, amulets, prayers to specific saints known for healing particular ailments. A fever might require a mix of herbal tea and a relic touched to the skin. The line between medicine, magic, and faith is blurred to invisibility. This constant dance with mortality shapes their daily lives and beliefs profoundly. Why bother saving or planning too much when life can be extinguished in a moment by a sudden fever or a plague? The focus is on the immediate, on ensuring your soul is right with God, on seeking protection wherever it might be found, in prayer, in ritual, in the wearing of a saint's medal, or a simple knot tied to ward off evil. Fear of sickness is inextricably linked with fear of death, and fear of death is intertwined with fear of eternal damnation. The vulnerability of the body feeds the desperation of the soul. There's a poignant melancholy in their resilience. They accept sickness and death with a fatalism that can seem cold to modern eyes, but it is born of necessity. To dwell too long on every loss would be paralyzing. The community grieves, performs the rituals, buries the body in the hallowed ground of the churchyard, and then must continue the work of living, because the land does not care about grief, and hunger waits for no one. Was it blind faith that saw them through, or a pragmatic understanding that the only way forward was through, one painful breath at a time, trusting in God, because what else was there? Ask yourself, if a cough could mean the end, if a cut could be fatal, how would you live each day? Would the constant presence of death make life more precious, or simply a fleeting, terrifying interlude before the inevitable? How would your beliefs about the unseen world comfort you in sickness, or terrify you with the possibility of divine punishment or malevolent interference? You light the candle, you say the prayer, you administer the bitter herbal brew. You do everything you can, and then you wait, your fate resting in hands far larger and more mysterious than your own. The church bells are the heartbeat of the village. They wake you at dawn, call you to prayer, mark the midday, signal evening vespers, toll for death, ring for celebration. Their sound is woven into the fabric of existence, a constant reminder of God's presence, the passage of time according to His will, and the central authority of the Church in every aspect of life. The local priest is more than a spiritual guide. He is often the most educated person in the community, an intermediary with the divine, an interpreter of Scripture, though few peasants could read, a record keeper, and sometimes a source of basic advice or mediation. His word carries immense weight, backed by the terrifying power of eternal damnation and the hopeful promise of heaven. Peasants might grumble about tithes, a tenth of their produce owed to the church, but few would dare defy the institution that held the keys to their salvation. The church building itself is often the grandest structure for miles, a beacon of stability and communal identity. It is where you are baptized, married, and eventually buried. Faith is not a private matter. It is a communal practice, deeply embedded in ritual and ceremony. The cycle of the liturgical year, Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, provides structure and meaning to the endless agricultural toil. Feast days are rare breaks from labor, filled with processions, feasting, modest by our standards, and revelry, all sanctioned and centered around the church. Saints are not distant figures, but powerful patrons to be petitioned for help with specific problems. Saint Anthony for lost items, Saint Agatha against fire, local saints associated with wells or groves that predate Christianity but have been assimilated. Pilgrimages, even short ones to local shrines, are acts of piety and community bonding. Superstition often walks hand in hand with formal doctrine. A farmer might pray to Saint Isidore before plowing, but also bury a charm at the field's edge to ward off blight. A woman might light a candle to the Virgin Mary for a safe birth, but also tie a red ribbon around her belly to protect against demons. The line between accepted Christian practice and folk belief is fluid, pragmatic. If it works, if the crop yields, if the child survives, it must be sanctioned, or at least tolerated by higher powers. The irony is that the very institution preaching divine order also inadvertently fostered a rich tapestry of local, often contradictory beliefs. Ask yourself, if the priest told you the plague was God's punishment for your sins, would you doubt him? If the only hope for salvation lay in rigid adherence to church teaching and ritual, would you dare to question? Was the omnipresence of the church a source of comfort in a chaotic world, providing meaning and community, or an oppressive force demanding obedience and resources, leveraging fear of the unknown? For the medieval peasant, faith wasn't a choice. It was the air they breathed, a complex mix of genuine piety, ingrained habit, social obligation, and pragmatic hedging against the terrifying uncertainties of life and death. The sun is already climbing, but the air in the barn is thick with dust and the smell of dried straw. Outside, the ground is hard, frozen. Inside, the work is monotonous, relentless. You stand on the threshing floor, a space hardened by centuries of pounding, and swing the flail. Thwack! A heavy wooden head, hinged to the handle, slams down onto the stalks of grain spread on the floor. Thwack! Again and again. Every task requires immense physical effort, aided only by the most basic tools. Plowing the heavy earth relies on the strength of oxen or horses pulling a wooden or iron-tipped plowshare, guided by a farmer who walks miles behind it every day. Sowing is done by hand, broadcasting seed from a pouch. Harvesting is back-breaking work with a sickle or scythe, bending low for hours under the sun. After threshing, winnowing involves tossing the grain and chaff into the air with a basket, letting the wind carry the lighter chaff away. A delicate dance requiring skill and patience. Grinding flour means hours at the mill, either a hand quern at home or hauling sacks to the communal water or windmill and paying the miller his due. Fetching water means carrying heavy buckets from the well or stream. Chopping wood, essential for cooking and warmth through the brutal winter, is axe work, pure muscle against stubborn timber. Spinning wool or flax for cloth is a perpetual task. Threads pulled and twisted hour after hour, often done while tending animals or watching children. All of it relies on muscle, leverage, and simple mechanics honed over centuries of trial and error. There are no engines, no automated processes, just human and animal power applied with bone-deep knowledge of materials and physics. Your body is your primary tool, and it wears down quickly. Joints ache, backs stoop, hands become calloused and gnarled. Life demands constant, exhaustive, physical labor using minimal technology. Efficiency is low. Survival is earned through sheer brute effort. The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the flail echoing in the barn is the soundtrack to existence. A relentless, unchanging beat, dictated by the necessity of processing every single stalk of grain by hand. There's a profound disconnect here from the modern world. We rely on machines for almost everything, from planting seeds to grinding coffee beans. How has this changed our relationship with physical work, effort, and the tangible results of our labor? Do we understand the true value of a loaf of bread when we haven't felt the strain in our shoulders from harvesting the wheat, or the ache in our arms from grinding the flour? What skills have we lost that were once essential for human survival? Skills of hand, eye, and sheer endurance. The medieval peasant knew, intimately, the effort embedded in every crumb of food, every thread of cloth. Their lives were a testament to the raw, unadulterated power of human muscle and will against the stubborn resistance of the physical world. There was no shortcut, no easy path, just the sweat, the strain, and the hope that the body would hold out just long enough. Outside the hut, outside the fields, the village is a tightly woven web of interdependence. You don't just live near your neighbors, you live with them. Your fates bound together by shared labor, shared faith, and shared vulnerability. The village is a small universe, largely isolated from the wider world. News travels slowly, mostly by word of mouth, carried by rare travelers, a peddler, a returning pilgrim, the Lord's messenger. Life is intensely local. Your relationships with the smith who sharpens your tools, the miller who grinds your grain, the priest who tends your soul, the Lord's reeve who oversees the manor. These are the crucial connections that govern your daily existence. There is little anonymity. Everyone knows your family history, your habits, your successes and failures. Gossip is a powerful social force, capable of enforcing norms or ostracizing those who deviate. Survival is a communal effort. When a barn needs raising, the whole village pitches in. During harvest, families help each other to bring in the crop before the weather turns. If sickness strikes one household, neighbors might leave food or help with chores, motivated by charity, fear of the illness spreading, or the simple understanding that tomorrow it might be them needing help. Disputes arise over land boundaries, stray animals, perceived slights, and are often settled locally by the village elders or the Lord's representative, sometimes with harsh justice. Public shaming devices like the stocks are a physical manifestation of the community's power to enforce conformity. This intense interdependence creates a unique social reality. There is strength in numbers, a buffer against complete destitution or isolation. But there is also little room for individual expression, for choosing a different path. Your role is largely determined by your birth, your family's place in the village hierarchy. The weight of communal expectation can be heavy. To be seen as lazy, dishonest, or disruptive threatens not just your own standing, but your family's place within the vital social web. The irony? This world, seemingly so different, shares with ours the fundamental human need for belonging and the complex dynamics of social pressure within a limited group. Ask yourself, in a world where your survival literally depended on your neighbors, would you prioritize community harmony above all else? Would you conform to village expectations even if they chafed against your spirit? Or would the lack of privacy, the constant scrutiny, feel like an unbearable cage? You live and die within this small circle of faces. Their approval is your social currency, their help your safety net, their judgment a constant, silent threat. She rises before dawn, while the fire is still banked coals. While the men prepare for the fields, her work has already begun. Fetching water from the well, perhaps breaking ice in winter, lighting the fire, preparing the meager morning meal, often just bread and watered ale or gruel. Women's work is perpetual, interwoven with the rhythms of the household and the seasons. They tend the small garden plot near the hut, growing herbs and vegetables that supplement the grain-heavy diet. They keep chickens or geese, collect eggs. Brewing ale for the family, or for sale, is common and necessary work. Inside, the tasks are endless. Cleaning, a losing battle against smoke and dirt, cooking, mending clothes, processing food for storage, salting meat, drying herbs, making cheese. Spinning wool or flax is a constant necessity. It takes countless hours to produce enough thread for a single garment. Weaving is less common at the household level, often done by specialists, but preparing the fiber falls to women. Childbearing is a central part of identity and also the greatest physical danger. High rates of infant and child mortality mean a woman might endure multiple pregnancies and births, only to see many of her children die before reaching adulthood. Each birth is a gamble with death, a test of endurance and fate. Yet women are essential to the agricultural economy too. They often work in the fields alongside men, especially during peak times like harvest, gathering sheaves or gleaning leftover grain after the reapers have passed. They might also be responsible for specific crops like beans or peas. Legally, women have limited rights compared to men, especially married women whose property and legal identity are often subsumed by their husbands. Yet, within the household and the immediate community, women often hold considerable informal power. As keepers of the hearth, managers of domestic resources, and bearers of children, they are the linchpins of family survival. The village wise woman, often skilled in herbal medicine and midwifery, holds a position of respect, even if tinged with suspicion. Widows, rare but present, might gain more independence if they inherit property, though their position is vulnerable. There's an undeniable resilience in the face of constant physical labor, emotional loss through child death, and societal limitations. Their work is vital, constant, often invisible to the historical record focused on men's public lives, yet it is the bedrock of daily existence. The irony? While often considered the weaker sex, medieval women performed labor that would break most modern individuals, carrying the weight of household survival and the future generation on their shoulders, often literally, as they worked fields while pregnant or carrying infants. Ask yourself, if your worth was largely tied to your ability to bear children and perform relentless domestic and agricultural labor, how would you find personal meaning? If every birth was a risk of death, how would you approach motherhood? What silent strengths and forms of resistance existed for women in a society that offered them little formal power? Their legacy is not written in laws, but in the meals cooked, the cloth spun, the the children raised or mourned. The quiet endurance that kept the heart of the medieval home beating. Children are everywhere, small figures underfoot, soon joining the labor force. High infant mortality is a grim reality. Perhaps a third of children die before their first birthday, another third before they reach adulthood. You learn not to count on their survival too soon, a heartbreaking emotional calculation born of bitter experience. Names might not be given until after the critical first few weeks. A sick child is tended with desperate hope and simple remedies, but also with a pragmatic acceptance of fate. Childhood, as we understand it today, is brief, almost non-existent for peasant children. By the age of 5 or 6, they are expected to contribute to the household economy. Scaring crows from fields, gathering firewood, fetching water, looking after younger siblings. Play exists, but it is often mimicking adult tasks or simple games with stones or sticks. Toys are few, homemade, cherished. Formal education is almost unheard of. Learning comes from watching and doing, from parents, older siblings, and neighbors. Boys learn farming or their father's trade. Girls learn household management, spinning, childcare from their mothers. For some boys, particularly those destined for priesthood or those from slightly wealthier families, there might be a chance for literacy or further training, perhaps sent to a monastery or guildmaster as an apprentice. But for the vast majority, the skills needed for survival are the only curriculum. Learning to handle a sickle, to milk a goat, to spin thread, to plant seeds. These are the lessons that matter. The transition from child to adult worker is gradual, unmarked by formal ceremony other than religious rites like confirmation. By their early teens, they are effectively adults, capable of performing a full day's labor. There's a stark contrast here with our protracted period of protected childhood and formal education. Medieval children are integrated into the world of work and adult concerns almost from the moment they can walk. Their value is tied to their ability to contribute, not just to their potential or emotional development. The irony? While seemingly harsh, this immediate integration meant they learned the skills essential for their world deeply and practically, skills many modern adults lack entirely. They carried the future not in textbooks, but in their growing muscles and calloused hands. Ask yourself, how would you raise a child knowing they might not survive the year? Would you invest deep emotional attachment or protect yourself with a degree of detachment born of frequent loss? If your child's education was solely practical, focused on survival skills, what kind of hopes and dreams would you have for them? Their legacy is the ability to continue the cycle, to take up the sickle and the spindle, ensuring the fragile line of human existence perseveres. The bray of the donkey, the lowing of the ox, the bleating of the sheep, these are the sounds of the medieval farm, as essential as human voices. Animals are not just livestock. They are partners in labor, sources of food and materials, and sometimes the objects of superstition or affection. Oxen are the primary source of heavy power for plowing, their slow, steady strength ideal for turning the tough medieval soil. Horses, faster and more agile but requiring richer feed, are more common for transport or lighter work, or for those slightly better off. Without these beasts of burden, the scale of agriculture possible would be dramatically reduced. They are the engines of this world. Sheep provide wool for clothing, meat, and milk. Pigs scavenge for food and provide vital fat and protein. Chickens provide eggs and occasional meat. Cattle provide milk, cheese, and meat, and their hides are essential for leather. Every part of an animal is valuable. Nothing is wasted. Caring for animals is a constant task, woven into the daily routine. Finding pasture, providing shelter in winter, protecting them from predators, dealing with animal sickness. These are essential for survival. The death of an animal, especially an ox or a horse, can be a significant economic disaster for a family. Their health is monitored closely, often with a mix of practical observation, herbal remedies, and prayers or charms. Saint George, Saint Anthony the Abbot, and other saints are petitioned for the health of livestock. Animals also feature in folk belief and superstition. Certain birds might be seen as omens. The appearance of a wild animal near the village could be interpreted as a bad sign. Some beliefs even linked animals to demonic forces or witchcraft. Yet despite this, there is often a closeness born of shared existence. Living in close proximity, relying on them for survival, witnessing their births and deaths, it fosters a complex relationship, a mix of pragmatic utility, spiritual belief, and perhaps a quiet form of affection. The dog that guards the flock, the ox that has pulled the plow for years, they are part of the family's struggle. Ask yourself, if your own ability to eat depended on the health and strength of an animal you owned, how would you view it? As merely a resource or something more? If you believed certain animals could carry omens or even be agents of evil, how would that affect your interactions with the natural world? Their connection to animals was deeper, more vital, and perhaps more complexly emotional than ours, stripped of sentimentality by the harsh demands of survival, yet bound by inescapable interdependence. The day begins not with an alarm clock, but with the first light creeping over the horizon and the distant peal of the church bell for matins. It ends, not when work is done, but when the sun dips below the tree line, plunging the world into shadow, and the bell tolls for vespers. Life is dictated by the stark, unchanging rhythms of the day and the predictable, yet unpredictable, cycle of the seasons. In summer, the days are long, and work begins at first light, stretching until dusk. There is a frantic energy to these months, plowing, sowing, weeding, and finally, the desperate race of harvest. The body is pushed to its limits under the sun. In winter, the days are short, and work is curtailed by darkness and cold. Tasks shift indoors, repairing tools, spinning, weaving, carving wood, perhaps threshing grain in the barn. Food is scarcer, relying on stored provisions. The cold bites deep, and the risk of illness from damp and lack of nutrition is high. Spring brings renewed hope, the promise of new growth, but also the anxiety of whether the seeds will sprout and the weather will hold. Autumn is dominated by harvest, the gathering of resources for the long winter ahead, followed by the slaughter of animals that cannot be fed through the lean months. There is no artificial light to extend the day's labor or leisure, save for expensive candles or flickering rushes dipped in fat. Evening hours are spent huddled around the fire, telling stories, mending, perhaps sharing a communal meal. The rhythm of sleep is different too, often broken. A period of sleep after dusk, waking for a few hours for prayer, conversation, or work, then sleeping again until dawn. This segmented sleep is natural without artificial light, connecting them more intimately to the solar cycle. This life, so governed by natural rhythms, highlights our detachment. We live in a world of constant artificial light, climate control, and readily available food, regardless of the season. We have divorced ourselves from the immediate demands of the sun, the rain, the cold earth. The medieval peasant lived in constant dialogue with these forces, their very existence a reflection of nature's power. Ask yourself, if your entire life was dictated by the rising and setting of the sun and the turning of the seasons, how would that shape your perception of time, of progress, of control? Would you feel more connected to the natural world or more utterly subject to its whims? How would the long, dark winters affect your spirit, or the burst of spring feel like a true miracle? Their lives were a continuous, physical conversation with the earth and the sky, a conversation we have largely forgotten how to have. Above the village, on the hill or across the valley, stands the Lord's manor house or castle, a constant, physical reminder of who holds power. For the vast majority of peasants, freedom is a theoretical concept. Reality is bound by the feudal system, by obligations owed to the lord of the manor. As serfs, you are tied to the land. You cannot leave without the lord's permission, cannot marry someone from another manor without paying a fee. You owe the lord labor, perhaps working his domain, his own land, for a certain number of days a week, especially during planting and harvest. You owe him rents, often in kind, a portion of your own harvest, chickens, eggs, firewood. You must use his mill to grind your grain, his oven to bake your bread, paying a fee for each service. He settles disputes, administers justice, often harsh and arbitrary, and provides a nominal level of protection, gathering the men in times of threat, though his primary concern is his own wealth and power. This system is the framework of medieval peasant life, defining social relations and economic realities. There is little opportunity for upward mobility. Your status is fixed by birth. Ambition, if it exists, is often tempered by the understanding that any surplus or success is ultimately vulnerable to the Lord's demands or whims. Survival involves navigating this relationship, fulfilling obligations, avoiding his displeasure. It requires a specific kind of resilience, not outright rebellion, which is usually suicidal, but quiet endurance, finding small ways to resist or mitigate the Lord's demands, perhaps hiding a portion of the harvest or working slightly slower on the domain. The burden of obligation is constant. It shapes decisions about how much land to cultivate, what crops to plant, when to sell surplus, if any. Every calculation must factor in what is owed to the Lord, the Church, and the King, rarely felt directly by peasants, but present. It is a life lived under authority, where personal autonomy is severely limited. The irony? While tied to the land and obligated to a lord, this system also provided a degree of stability and structure in a potentially chaotic world. The lord's self-interest meant he needed the peasants to survive and be productive, offering a reciprocal, if unequal, relationship. Ask yourself, if your life and labor belonged in part to another person, how would you define freedom? Would you accept your station with quiet resignation, or harbor secret resentments? How would the constant weight of obligations shape your decisions and your hopes? Their lives were a negotiation between their own needs and the demands of the powerful, a delicate balance struck to endure another season, another year, under the Lord's watchful eye. The world is alive, not just with people and animals, but with unseen forces, spirits, and intentions. Medieval life is steeped in belief in the supernatural, a blend of Christian doctrine, older folk traditions, and a pragmatic attempt to explain and influence a world they couldn't otherwise control. Charms are commonplace, small physical objects or rituals imbued with protective power. An amulet worn around the neck against sickness. A horseshoe nailed above the door for luck. Specific knots tied in yarn to ward off evil. Spells or incantations, often a mix of distorted Latin prayers and folk rhymes, are used for everything from healing a wound to finding lost items or ensuring a good harvest. Omens are read in the flight of birds, the shape of clouds, dreams, or unusual events. A black cat crossing your path, the hoot of an owl at night, these might signal misfortune. Folk healers, distinct from official doctors, are consulted for their knowledge of herbalism and their supposed ability to interact with the unseen. They might use poultices and teas, but also divining rods or rituals to diagnose illness or locate lost property. While the Church condemned outright magic and witchcraft, many folk practices were tolerated, especially if they seemed beneficial or didn't explicitly challenge Christian doctrine. The fear of witchcraft, however, was real and could have devastating consequences for those accused, particularly women who were outside social norms or who practiced healing arts. This fear often peaked during times of crisis, plague, famine, social unrest. Then a scapegoat was needed for inexplicable suffering. This widespread belief in the unseen world provides both comfort and terror. It offers explanations for the inexplicable: why a child died, why the crop failed, why illness struck. It provides a sense that one can do something, however small, to influence fate, to seek protection, to gain good fortune. But it also populates the world with potential threats. Demons lurking in the shadows, spirits of the dead, the malevolent intentions of envious neighbors channeling dark forces. Life is a constant negotiation with these unseen powers. Ask yourself, if you believed that unseen forces could influence your health, your fortune, and your safety, how would you navigate the world? Would you feel constantly vulnerable or empowered by the knowledge of protective rituals? How would you distinguish between divine intervention, natural events, and the work of magic? For them, the veil between the physical and spiritual world was thin, permeable. Every strange occurrence, every stroke of luck or misfortune could be a sign, a blessing or a curse, demanding interpretation and response rooted in faith and deep-seated superstition. Life for most medieval peasants was confined to a small geographical area: the village, the surrounding fields, perhaps a nearby market town or shrine, reachable within a day's walk. Travel was difficult, dangerous, and rare. The roads were often in poor condition, infested with bandits or wild animals. River travel was sometimes possible, but subject to tolls and natural hazards. For the vast majority, the only journey of any significant distance might be a pilgrimage to a local shrine, or, exceptionally, to a more famous pilgrimage site, if resources and permission allowed. Pilgrimage was an act of deep piety, a way to seek divine favor, healing, or penance. It was also one of the few ways a peasant might see something of the wider world, encounter people from different regions, and bring back stories and, often embellished, accounts of places far from home. Merchants, though not peasants, were the primary long-distance travelers, carrying goods and news between towns and regions. Their arrival in a village, a rare event of excitement and connection to the outside world. This isolation shaped their worldview. Knowledge of distant lands, different cultures, major historical events was limited and often filtered through rumor, legend, or the simplified accounts of the church. The world felt both vast and terrifyingly unknown beyond the familiar confines of the manor. Fear of the other, of outsiders, was common, stemming from this isolation and lack of direct experience. Diseases, famine, and warfare often arrived unexpectedly from distant places, reinforcing the sense that the outside world was a source of danger, best avoided. The pace of life was inherently slow, tied to walking or the speed of oxen. News traveled at the speed of a foot or horse. Information was precious, unreliable, subject to distortion. This stands in stark contrast to our instantaneous global communication. The medieval peasant's world was small, intimate, and profoundly local, defined by personal relationships and direct experience of their immediate environment. Ask yourself, if your world was limited to a few square miles and the faces you saw every day, how would you imagine what lay beyond? Would you yearn for travel and adventure, or would the known world feel safe enough? How would the slow spread of information affect your sense of events, your understanding of history? Their isolation was a form of protection, but also a source of ignorance and vulnerability to external forces they could neither understand nor control. Amidst the relentless labor and pervasive hardship, moments of simple pleasure were cherished, anchors in a life defined by struggle. These weren't grand entertainments, but small, vital breaks in the rhythm of survival. Storytelling around the fire on long winter nights was a primary form of entertainment and education, passing down history, legends, morality tales, and simple jokes. Music, often simple folk tunes played on pipes or drums, accompanied celebrations. Local games, like rudimentary forms of football, often violent and involving the entire village, or wrestling, provided physical outlets and communal bonding. Visiting minstrels or traveling entertainers, though rare, were sources of immense excitement. Feast days, the major religious holidays like Christmas and Easter, but also local saints' days or harvest festivals, were the most significant breaks from labor. On these days, work was forbidden, and the community would gather at the church, followed by communal feasting, drinking in the alehouse. Ale was a staple, often safer to drink than water, singing and dancing. These moments of collective joy, even if the feasting was modest, perhaps a rare piece of meat or cheese, were vital for social cohesion and emotional resilience. They were a reminder that life wasn't only toil and suffering, that moments of lightness and connection were possible. Evenings after the sun had set and chores were done might involve neighbors visiting each other's huts, sharing news, gossip, or simply sitting together in companionable silence. The simple act of sharing warmth and company against the cold and dark was a pleasure in itself. There was a deeper appreciation for these small moments precisely because they were hard-earned, temporary reprieves from the constant pressure of survival. There is a powerful lesson here about finding joy in simplicity, in human connection, in the fundamental pleasures of food, drink, and shared celebration. We, with our endless array of entertainment options and constant stimulation, might struggle to appreciate the profound impact of a simple song shared around a fire, or the relief of a day off from back-breaking work. The irony? Their lives were materially impoverished, yet their moments of collective celebration might have been richer, more deeply felt, precisely because they were so rare and so essential for reaffirming community bonds and the will to continue. Ask yourself, if a day off work and a shared pot of ale were among the greatest pleasures life offered, how would you savor them? Would these simple moments be enough to sustain you through the hardship? What forms of resilience were forged in the shared laughter and song of a village festival, knowing that toil would resume tomorrow? Their capacity for simple joy was as essential a survival skill as their knowledge of farming or their faith in God. Death was not a distant, abstract concept. It was a frequent visitor, a constant presence in the village. High mortality rates meant few reached old age, and everyone knew someone who had died recently. A child, a parent, a neighbor, taken by sickness, accident, or the swift violence of the world. The rituals around death were communal and deeply important. When someone was dying, the priest would be summoned to administer the last rites, ensuring the soul was shriven and prepared for the journey to the afterlife. Sudden, unshriven death was greatly feared, as it left no time for confession and absolution, potentially condemning the soul to purgatory or hell. After death, the body would be prepared for burial, often washed and wrapped in a shroud by family or neighbors. A wake might be held, a period of mourning and communal gathering, blending grief with prayers for the soul's repose. Burial took place in the hallowed ground of the churchyard, the final resting place within the sacred space that had governed their lives. The grave was simple, often unmarked beyond perhaps a wooden cross that would soon rot. The cycle of life and death was physically evident in the churchyard, generations buried side by side, their dust mingling in the soil. The church taught of heaven and hell, of purgatory where souls could be cleansed through suffering before ascending to God. Belief in the afterlife provided a framework for understanding mortality, offering hope for the righteous and a terrifying deterrent for sinners. Prayers for the dead, requiem masses, were vital acts performed by the living to aid the souls of the departed. This constant proximity to death shaped attitudes towards life, faith, and morality. Memento mori, reminders of death, were common in art and preaching. The fragility of life underscored the importance of living righteously, of being prepared for the final judgment. The fear of hell was a powerful motivator for adherence to church teaching and avoidance of sin. Yet, alongside this fear, there was also acceptance, born of necessity and frequency. Grief was real and deeply felt, but life had to continue for the living. Ask yourself, if death was a constant neighbor, how would you live differently? Would the fear of judgment shape every decision? How would you cope with the frequent loss of loved ones, especially children? For the medieval peasant, death was not an ending to be denied, but a transition, a test, and a powerful force that gave shape and meaning to the way they lived every single day, urging them toward salvation before their inevitable and often swift reckoning. We step back out of the smoke-filled hut, away from the endless fields, the sound of the flail fading. We leave the dust of medieval life behind. But what do we carry back with us? It wasn't a golden age, romanticized by tales of chivalry. For most, it was a relentless, brutal, fragile existence, lived on the edge of survival, under the weight of labor, authority, and pervasive fear. Yet in that hardship, there is profound human truth. They lived in intimate connection with the natural world, their lives dictated by its undeniable power. They found strength in community, relying on each other in ways we have largely forgotten. They possessed a deep, if often fearful, faith that sought meaning and solace in a world filled with inexplicable suffering. They found simple joys in shared moments, savored precisely because they were rare. They endured, not through advanced technology or political freedom, but through sheer physical and emotional resilience, through the accumulated wisdom of generations passed down, not in books, but in calloused hands and weary bones. What we gain when we honestly study these ordinary vanished people is a deeper understanding of human capacity, for endurance, for adaptability, for finding meaning in the most challenging circumstances. We see our own privileges starkly illuminated, and are reminded of the fundamental human needs that transcend centuries, for safety, for connection, for meaning, for hope against despair. We learn that survival isn't always about conquering. Sometimes it's just about bending, adapting, and finding the strength to face another dawn. What still remains of them in us? Perhaps the echoes of their fears, in our own anxieties about forces beyond our control. Perhaps the deep-seated need for belonging, for community, that still drives us. Perhaps, if we look closely, the faint genetic memory of what it means to earn a living with the raw power of our own bodies, to be truly dependent on the earth and the rain. They had no legacy carved in stone, but every seed they planted, every prayer they whispered in terror, built the world we now take for granted. The air around the communal oven hums with the quiet energy of the village. Women gather, loaves nestled on shovels, waiting their turn in the brick maw that smells of burnt flour and ancient heat. Men lean against the rough stone wall, mending a strap, sharpening a tool, their voices low and steady. Here, by the well or the bakehouse, the web is spun, thread by thread. Your neighbor, Thomas, helps you lift a heavy beam for your new shed, his muscles straining alongside yours. You, in turn, lend Ilara the good metal pot when her youngest is sick and needs broth. When a calf is born breech, hands you trust are there to help the cow, guided by the whispered wisdom of those who have seen it before. This mutual aid isn't charity, it's currency, denser and more vital than silver. But the closeness is a double-edged sickle. Every interaction is noted. The speed at which gossip travels across the yard is faster than any horse you've ever seen. Agnes was seen speaking too long with the man from the next village. Young Simon didn't attend Mass last Sunday. Ilara's roof still hasn't been patched, even after the last rain. Is she lazy or just too proud to ask for help? Your life is a tapestry woven in public, and every snag, every loose thread is visible and commented upon. The pressure to conform is a weight as heavy as the plow you share with your brother. You marry who the community expects, farm how your father farmed, believe what the priest tells you. To step outside the accepted pattern is not just frowned upon, it's dangerous. You risk the very support system your survival depends on. A long-simmering feud between two families, born generations ago from a disputed patch of land or a forgotten insult, can poison the air for everyone, forcing people to choose sides in a conflict they didn't start. Your individuality is a small, fragile thing, constantly pressed down by the needs and norms of the collective. Survival isn't about standing out. It's about fitting in, about being a strong, reliable thread in the village weave. Your safety net is woven from the hands and eyes around you, offering help when needed, but also holding you tightly within its structure. There's a quiet melancholy in this interdependence. You are never truly alone, but you are also rarely truly free. Ask yourself, in a world where every action is observed and judged, where your survival hinges on the good opinion of your neighbors, would you cling to a hidden sense of self, or would you learn to bend, shaping yourself just enough to fit the mold the village demands? We in our modern fragmented lives value our anonymity, our privacy. We can disappear into cities, change our identities, make choices independent of our neighbors' eyes. We gain freedom from scrutiny, certainly, but in losing that constant, sometimes suffocating gaze, do we also lose the deep, ingrained connection and essential, automatic support that literally kept these people alive? The sound of the bell slices through the morning chill, a heavy, insistent toll that pulls at something deep within you. It is Sunday, and the parish church, small and smelling of damp stone and old incense, is the only place to be. You join the shuffling figures kneeling on the cold floor, the rough wool of your tunic scratching against your skin. The priest stands before the altar, a figure of immense, almost terrifying authority, his voice echoing in Latin you understand only in fragments, words like Deus, peccatum, infernum. Fear tightens your chest, fear of judgment, of the eternal fire promised for every missed prayer, every impure thought, every small dishonesty traded in the market. Yet mingled with this fear is a desperate hope. You light a thin candle for your child, sickly since the spring rains, and whisper a silent prayer to St. Jude, patron of lost causes, hoping for a miracle. You look at the painted icons, figures both divine and human, intercessors who might speak to God on your behalf. Life's greatest moments, the gasping arrival of a newborn, the solemn vows of marriage, the finality of death, are all marked by the church, by water and oil and whispered words of absolution or passage. It is the scaffolding of your existence, dictating the rhythm of the week, the year, and the soul's journey. But when the sickness doesn't lift, when the crops are blighted despite the priest's blessings, when a neighbor curses you with eyes that seem too dark, the church feels distant, its power sometimes too formal, for the raw, immediate fear in your belly. That night, you search your meager possessions for the small bag of dried herbs your grandmother gave you, muttering an old rhyme under your breath. You tie a scrap of red ribbon, painstakingly saved, around your child's tiny wrist, a ward against the evil eye they say can wither life like frost. You avoid the dense woods after dusk, not just because of wolves, but because whispers of mischievous sprites and older, darker things that dwell there persist, even after 1,000 years of Christ. Omens are everywhere. A bird's flight, the way smoke rises, a sudden stumble, signs from a world you cannot see but deeply believe in. This is the surprising reality. Your faith is profound, yet superstition is its shadow twin, a parallel language spoken in the face of everyday peril. The church provides the framework, the grand narrative of good and evil, God and the devil. But charms, rituals, and folk beliefs are the practical tools, the small, personal defenses against the immediate, inexplicable terrors, illness, bad luck, sudden death, that fill the gaps the church cannot or will not explain. Life is a constant spiritual battle, not just for your soul in the afterlife, but for your survival now, against forces both divine and demonic, saintly and spectral. It is a world where the priest's blessing coexists with a charm against witches, where the fear of hell is as real as the fear of a neighbor's curse. Ask yourself, in a world where hardship and tragedy were constant and often inexplicable, was it easier to believe in malevolent forces, in the touch of the devil, or the envy of a witch, than in random, meaningless suffering? While the specifics are different, do we still seek external explanations for life's cruelties, blaming systems, people, or fate? Finding comfort or control in modern anxieties or rituals that mirror, in some small way, the red ribbon against the evil eye? The crackling hearth offers little warmth tonight. You sit huddled on the cold earthen floor beside a straw pallet. Your youngest, barely 5 years old, is restless beneath a worn woolen blanket, his small body burning with fever. Each labored breath is a tightrope walk, a moment of agonizing suspense. This is the brutal reality of your life, a constant negotiation with flesh, frailty, and fate. Illness is not an occasional disruption. It is a frequent, unwelcome guest. A simple cut can fester into a death sentence. A common cough can deepen into a rattling that signals the end. Children, precious and fleeting, are particularly vulnerable. You've lost 2 already before they saw their second spring. Every new life is a gamble, a seed cast onto stony ground. Your medical knowledge is a strange brew of inherited wisdom, superstition, and desperation. You boil herbs like comfrey or yarrow, hoping their ancient powers will draw out the sickness or staunch the internal bleeding you imagine is happening. The village healer, a woman whose hands carry the scent of damp earth and potent simples, taught you this poultice. You apply the warm, damp cloth to your child's chest, a ritual born of love and fear. You also pray. You pray to the Virgin Mary, to Saint Jude, to any saint who might intercede on this small soul's behalf. Because you know the limits of herbs and poultices. You know how many little ones slip away, their small lights extinguished by forces no amount of earthly knowledge can comprehend. Hygiene, as you understand it, involves periodic washing, perhaps a dip in the river in warmer months, a quick scrub of face and hands daily. The concept of invisible germs is alien. Sickness is often blamed on bad air, evil humors out of balance, or even demonic influence. The filth of the animal pens, the waste in the streets, the shared water sources, these are simply the textures of life, unknowingly breeding grounds for the illnesses that sweep through the village like wildfire. Pain is a constant companion, a dull ache in your joints from labor, a throbbing tooth, the lingering consequences of childbirth or injury. You accept it, you bear it. It is simply part of the burden of being alive. Death is not a distant abstract debated by scholars. Death is the cart rumbling down the lane, carrying the latest casualty of the flux. Death is the sudden silence from your neighbor's cottage. Death is the small, still bundle you buried last year beneath the weeping willow. It is woven into the fabric of daily existence, a shadow that shortens with the setting sun. Your body feels inherently fragile, a temporary vessel under constant assault from within and without. Survival often feels less like a consequence of your actions and more like a matter of divine grace or capricious fate. We who measure life in decades and conquer diseases with pills live in a world these souls could not have imagined. Do we truly grasp the sheer precariousness of existence when life expectancy often didn't reach 40? Does facing constant mortality imbue life with a fierce urgency, a heightened appreciation for each sunrise and each meager harvest? Or does it breed a weary fatalism, a resignation to the unpredictable, brutal whims of the world and the heavens? Ask yourself, if tomorrow was never promised, how would you, or would the relentless fragility break your spirit, leaving you adrift in a sea of inescapable pain? You dip your wooden spoon into the heavy clay bowl. Pottage, again. Boiled grains, maybe a few scraggly leeks if you were lucky enough to gather them or afford them last market day. It's warm. It fills the belly a little, but it tastes of survival. Bland, gray, the same texture every day. Your teeth ache slightly from the hard, dense bread you chewed earlier, baked weeks ago. Meat is a dream, a song sung by traveling minstrels about feasts in distant castles. Hunger is a dull, constant note underlying the rhythm of your life. You eat not for pleasure, but because your body demands it, because the fields await, because there is no other choice. The taste is forgotten as soon as the last spoonful is swallowed. Only the lingering emptiness remains, a promise of tomorrow's identical meal. But the gray pottage days are not all the story. The church calendar, the turning of the seasons, the milestones of life, these punctuate the grind with bursts of glorious color. A saint's day means a break from labor, perhaps a simple procession, and maybe, just maybe, something different to eat. A wedding. The talk of it buzzes through the village for weeks. Someone might roast a pig. There will be ale, strong and dark, not just watered-down small beer. Harvest time, the back-breaking labor rewarded by a communal feast. Fresh bread baked from the new grain, perhaps cheese made from milk saved carefully, and the true miracle, honey cakes, sticky and sweet, a taste of pure luxury. May Day, the ribbons fly, the fiddle plays, feet pound the earth in joyous, clumsy dances. Here, surrounded by your neighbors, laughter ringing out, holding a cup of ale that warms your throat and belly, biting into a piece of actual glorious roasted meat. This is not just eating. This is living. This is joy so intense it makes your eyes sting. It is precious precisely because it is so rare, a brief, dazzling flame against the persistent shadow of scarcity. The worries of debt, disease, and frostbitten crops are momentarily banished by the simple, profound pleasure of shared revelry and food that tastes not just of sustenance, but of abundance. This rare, potent joy, found in a piece of cheese savored slowly or the communal gulp of strong ale, teaches a lesson carved deeper than any scripture. Hardship doesn't just make you resilient, it makes moments of plenty incandescent. The absence of enough transforms simple pleasures into profound blessings. We live in a world where any food, any flavor is available at any hour, a tap away. Ask yourself, have we lost the capacity for that kind of bone-deep appreciation? Does the constant, effortless availability of everything make even the most dazzling abundance feel merely sufficient? You huddle closer to the fire, the heat a fragile shield against the bone-deep cold that seeps in through the cracks in the wall. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry wolf, rattling the shuttered window and carrying with it the sharp sting of frost. The meager flames cast flickering shadows on the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, illuminating the worry lines etched on your face. Beside you, the youngest child stirs, a dry, rasping cough escaping thin lips. The grain stores, carefully measured last autumn, feel terrifyingly light. Will they last until spring? Will the ground thaw in time for planting, or will the frost cling stubbornly to the earth, mocking your desperate hope? Your calendar is not parchment and ink, but the turning of the seasons, dictated by the non-negotiable needs of agriculture. Spring meant the back-breaking labor of plowing, turning the heavy soil, and the gamble of sowing tiny seeds with prayers whispered for good fortune. Summer brought the rush of frantic growth, the anxious wait for sun, then rain, then sun again, and perhaps an early harvest of beans or peas to stave off the worst hunger. But autumn, autumn was the critical moment, the feverish race against time to bring in the grain, the vital staff of life, before the rains came or the first deadly frost arrived. Every hand was needed, every day counted. The success of the harvest wasn't just about food. It was about survival, about paying the Lord's due, about having seed for the next year's gamble. Now, winter grips the land, a time of relative rest, yes, but also a time of gnawing fear. The sun is a distant, pale orb, offering little warmth. Days are short, nights are long and cold. It's a time for mending tools by the firelight, for spinning wool, for telling old stories to pass the long hours. But mostly, it's a time of enduring. Enduring the cold, enduring the hunger that tightens its grip as the stores dwindle, enduring the uncertainty of whether spring will bring life or further hardship. Your activities, your worries, even your very survival are directly linked to the sun's warmth and the frost's bite. There is no buffer, no alternative food source from across the seas, no heated refuge. This life teaches a profound, humbling truth. Human life is utterly subservient to the cycles and power of the natural world. Adaptation to environmental rhythms is not a choice, not a lifestyle preference, but an absolute, unforgiving necessity. You live and die by the sun and the frost. You bend to the rhythm of the earth, or you break. It makes you reflect. Modern technology allows us to buffer ourselves so extensively from seasonal changes, heating in winter, air conditioning in summer, a global food supply that makes strawberries available in December. We have insulated ourselves from the ancient, primal dependence. What is lost, truly, when we lose this intimate, terrifying connection to the natural rhythms that once governed all life? Perhaps a deep humility, a visceral understanding of our own smallness against the vast, indifferent turning of the world. Or perhaps just a colder, emptier knowledge of what it means to be truly vulnerable. A child, barely taller than the plow handle, struggles to guide the ox, their small shoulders straining. Dust coats their face, sweat streaks through the grime. They are 6, maybe 7, but their hands know the rough wood, their feet the unforgiving earth. This is the brief summer of childhood, a season that passes quicker than the bloom of a rose. There is no time for games or stories beyond the hearth. Utility is demanded the moment your legs can carry water or your voice can scare away a hungry crow. You learn by doing, by watching your parents, by mimicking the ancient rhythms of field and hearth. The formal world of letters is a distant, incomprehensible whisper from a monastery you'll never see. Your classroom is the muddy furrow, the cold stream, the bustling, pungent yard, and the silence. Oh, the silence that settles in the crib too soon. The cradle often feels colder than the grave in these lands. Infant and child mortality is not a statistic. It is a constant, aching presence. It is the empty space at the table, the tiny bundle buried by the fence, the prayer whispered with eyes squeezed shut against a pain too vast for words. You learn early that love comes with a terrible risk, that holding on means potentially letting go before the first tooth falls. Superstitions bloom around this grief, rituals to ward off the evil eye, prayers to forgotten saints, desperate pleas to keep the cough from worsening. It's a cruel irony that the stage of life often romanticized is here defined by its fragility and its swift exit into demanding labor or the final sleep. Across the path, Old Man Thomas sits hunched by his door. His hands, once strong enough to fell an oak, now tremble as they try to hold a wooden cup. He cannot work the fields anymore. He cannot mend the fence. The village, perhaps his own children, feed him, clothe him in threadbare cloth. He is respected for the decades he endured, for the winters he survived, for the stored wisdom his failing mind occasionally permits. But the harsh truth of this existence is that value is inextricably tied to your physical contribution. When the body fails, the value wanes. Old age, a privilege few attain, becomes a tightrope walk between revered elder and burdensome mouth to feed. It is a hard winter when your age steals your strength, leaving you dependent entirely on the fragile charity of a community, perpetually on the edge of survival itself. This is the cycle, a quick burst into labor, a long middle passage of grinding toil, a rare, uncertain decline. There is little room for extended non-productivity. Ask yourself, how does this compressed, brutal life cycle change our understanding of what it means to be young, to be old? What are the burdens and freedoms of a life where your worth is measured in bushels reaped and wood chopped, compared to our world of extended education and retirement? What is gained and what is lost when the transitions between generations are not gradual shifts, but abrupt demands or steep declines? The air hangs heavy with quiet shame and the stink of the stalks. You stand amongst the villagers, a face in the hushed, expectant crowd, watching your neighbor Thomas, his face twisted in discomfort and mortification, his feet locked in the rough-hewn wood. Flies buzz around his head, indifferent. He stole a chicken, a simple, desperate act, born, you suspect, of a hungry belly and a lean harvest. The punishment is swift, enacted right here in the village square, overseen not by some distant king's judge, but by the Lord's steward, a man who knows every family, every feud, every secret. Justice here is a local affair, as intimate and inescapable as the turning of the seasons or the tolling of the village bell for a funeral. Disputes over a stray pig trampling a garden, a boundary stone moved in the night, or a few shillings worth of grain stolen from a barn are settled quickly. There are no complex courts, no scrolls of intricate law you cannot read. The law is the custom, the word of the steward or the reeve, backed by the common agreement or fearful silence of the community gathered before you. Punishment isn't about rehabilitation. It's about immediate deterrence, a blunt force applied to maintain the fragile, tightly woven fabric of village life. Fines are common, paid in eggs, grain, or labor. Payment felt directly by the family. Banishment, however, is the true death sentence. Cut off from the village, you are cut off from survival itself. But the stocks are different. This public humiliation is a spectacle designed to burn the consequence into the memory of not just the offender, but every single person watching. The sun beats down. Thomas shifts, groaning softly. He endures the jeers of the cruel, the pitying glances of the kind, and the stony indifference of most. This isn't just physical discomfort. It's the deliberate shattering of his standing in the community. Everyone sees his shame. His wife will see it. His children will see it. They will live with it long after the wood is unlocked. There are no hidden cells, no walls to shield the guilty from the community's gaze. The punishment is the public shame, the social exclusion, the stark demonstration of what happens when you break the unwritten, vital laws of communal survival. It's a constant reminder: conform or face the glare of everyone you know. Ask yourself, is this crude public justice, prioritizing communal order above all else, truly less just than a system where crimes are judged in private rooms and punishments served in hidden places? What is the cost of privacy in justice? We have replaced public shame and immediate community consequence with institutional isolation. They used the power of the collective gaze to enforce norms. We rely on systems of control we often never see. What is lost when the consequences of breaking the rules are no longer a spectacle shared by the whole village, but a process hidden behind stone walls? The ache in your back is a dull constant, a reminder of the unforgiving earth you've wrestled with since dawn. Dust coats your tongue, the taste of dried sweat and labor. Yet tonight, the air is different. A fiddle scrapes a joyful, slightly off-key tune in the village square, joined by a pipe and a drum. The harvest is in, or at least the critical, back-breaking part of getting the grain from field to barn is done. It's not finished, not safe from rats or rot, but this moment is earned. You watch neighbors, usually bowed by toil and worry, stumble through a clumsy dance. There's laughter, loud and unrestrained, the sound of it cutting through the usual hum of anxiety and exhaustion. The weariness hasn't vanished entirely. It's just been granted a temporary reprieve. A young couple, recently wed after a courtship measured in furtive glances and shared burdens, exchange shy smiles before being dragged into the swirling, bumping mass of bodies. A woman whose face has been etched with the lines of countless winters and too many goodbyes, throws back her head and sings a bawdy song, her voice surprisingly strong. This is not the refined entertainment of lords and ladies. This is raw, communal joy, forged in the shared crucible of survival. It's a wedding, perhaps. Simple vows exchanged before the priest, followed by a feast that stretches the village's meager resources but fills bellies with stew and hands with rough ale. It's a birth, another soul brought into a precarious world, celebrated not just for the child, but for the mother's survival through the perilous passage. It's a traveling jongleur, his tales of faraway lands and mythical beasts providing a fleeting escape from the reality of mud and dung and aching joints. It's the sheer, unadulterated relief when the spring planting takes root, or the sheep survive a harsh winter. These moments, simple as they are more than mere distractions. They are anchors, ballast against the constant threat of famine, sickness, and the unpredictable wrath of nature or lords. When life is a tightrope walk over an abyss, every step taken without falling is a victory, and every brief moment of light is a beacon. Celebration in this context isn't a luxury enjoyed after survival. It's a necessary fuel for endurance. The shared laughter, the communal meal, the clumsy dancing, they are the reaffirmation of connection, of belonging, of the fact that you are not alone in this struggle. They are the threads that hold the frayed fabric of community together when everything else threatens to tear it apart. You might believe in saints and curses, fear demons in the darkness and witches in the wood, but the most potent magic you experience is the simple human miracle of shared joy under a moon-washed sky. Consider this. In a time where the line between life and death was razor thin, where the smell of disease was never far off, and the next meal was never guaranteed, these bursts of communal celebration were acts of profound defiance. They were the spirit's refusal to be extinguished by the gloom. The taste of ale, shared from a single cup, the warmth of bodies pressed together in a dance, the simple, unadorned music. These were experiences so potent because they were so rare, so hard-won. They highlighted, through sheer contrast, the relentless hardship that framed them. Ask yourself, when pleasure is abundant and readily available, do we lose the capacity for the deep, resonant joy found in moments earned through collective struggle and shared relief? Do the sparks lose their brilliance when they are not set against a backdrop of profound darkness? Your fingers tie the knot, a twist of dried rosemary, a smooth gray stone from the riverbank, a feather found on the path. You bind them with rough twine, whispering the words your mother taught you, the words her mother taught her. This is a charm, a shield woven from the natural world against forces that are anything but natural. You stretch up, placing the small bundle above the doorframe, a silent guardian against whatever ill wind might blow through your home. Because the world, as you know it, is not merely earth and sky, seed and harvest. It is alive, pulsing with unseen forces. The sudden illness that strikes your neighbor, not just bad humors, but perhaps a curse whispered by an envious tongue, or the work of a malevolent spirit drawn to weakness. The blight that takes the wheat, more than just a wet summer, perhaps the malice of a fey creature, or the wrath of a saint you've somehow offended. Life is a battlefield, and many of your foes are invisible. Omens are everywhere, if you know how to look. The way the smoke curls from the chimney on a still morning, does it rise straight and true, a good sign for the day's work? Or does it twist and fall back, heavy with foreboding? A certain bird call at dawn, heard 3 times in quick succession. A dog howling in the night, facing away from the village. The crack a certain bone makes when thrown in the fire. Each is a whisper from the other side, a warning or a blessing you must interpret quickly. You see a raven alight on your left side as you leave for market, its eye glinting like polished coal. Without conscious thought, your hand goes to your mouth, and you spit quickly onto the ground, a small, sharp rejection of the bad luck it portends. It is a reflex older than any church you know. This isn't merely fear, though there is plenty of that, thick as the autumn fog. It is a practical means of navigation in a world that offers precious little stability or scientific explanation. The Church tells you of God, of saints, of angels and demons, but these are vast, often distant powers. Folk magic provides the immediate, tangible tools for the everyday skirmishes. A poultice of herbs for a burn, yes, but tied with a red thread for protection against the burning spirit. A prayer to Saint Anthony for lost things, yes, but also leaving a small offering of milk for the hidden folk who might have borrowed your tools. The line between the blessed water from the priest and the dew collected before sunrise on a certain stone feels thin, porous. Both are sought for their power. Before you lie down on your straw mattress, the fire banked low, casting dancing shadows that seem to flicker with unseen life, you perform another ritual. You whisper the short prayer against the night hag, the oppressive spirit believed to sit on your chest and steal your breath in the dark. It's a simple set of words, passed down, and perhaps it is just the comfort of routine, but you feel a tiny easing of the tightness in your chest as you say them. Sleep comes easier then, less burdened by the terror of being helpless against things that have no body, no name you can truly speak. People actively sought to interact with and appease these perceived unseen forces, not out of ignorance, but out of a desperate need to make sense of and exert some small, precarious control over an utterly unpredictable world. When illness struck, when crops failed, when a child died in the night, belief in the supernatural provided an explanation. It wasn't just bad luck, it was a battle lost against a specific though unseen foe. And if there were foes, there must also be defenses, methods, however ineffective they seem to us now, for coping. These rituals, these charms, were their shield and their sword. Ask yourself now, while we have charts and science, medicines and meteorology, have we truly abandoned the impulse? When faced with complexity we cannot easily grasp, or events we feel utterly powerless to control, a pandemic sweeping the globe, a political future that feels uncertain, the sudden, inexplicable loss of someone we love, do we never grasp for narratives that simplify, blame unseen forces, or cling to rituals, however illogical, that make us feel we are doing something? What does this persistent need tell us about us, then and now? It speaks of our shared human vulnerability, our fundamental need for narrative in chaos, and the enduring, quiet struggle to find a little bit of control where the world offers none. The dawn arrives not with light, but with the slow lifting of bone-deep weariness. You stand on the edge of the field, the soil damp beneath your worn boots, and your gaze drifts past the newly turned earth, past the scattered cottages, towards the distant shape of the manor house. It sits on the rise, a stone weight holding down the horizon, separate and unyielding. You don't dream of living there. That world is as unreachable as the moon. Your life is written in the furrows you plow, the seeds you sow, the animals you tend. Your father worked this land, his father before him, back further than memory or tale. Your children will learn the same rhythms, feel the same ache in their backs, follow the same path from cradle to grave. The idea of climbing a ladder, of transforming your circumstance through sheer will or cleverness, is a foreign concept, a strange tale from a land you'll never see. Your birthright is the earth, the tools, the endless cycle of season and labor. You are a peasant. You will die a peasant. This fixed reality is not a cage to resent, but the known world. Ambition is a dangerous luxury. It invites disappointment, perhaps even the Lord's suspicion. Your aspirations are small, vital, tethered firmly to survival. A good harvest next year, enough grain to fill the stores against the gnawing hunger of winter. A healthy child who coughs less each night and survives the perilous first few years, escaping the grip of infant death that takes so many little souls before they even know the sun. Perhaps, through years of brutal saving, enough surplus to trade for an extra piglet, or a sturdier scythe that won't break mid-harvest, a catastrophe that could spell ruin. These are the pinnacles of success, not wealth, not status, but security within the razor's edge of existence. To live a secure life, even a meager one, constantly overshadowed by the threat of famine or sickness, is the highest possible aspiration. To simply be, to not feel the constant ache of hunger, to see your family live through another year, that is the only dream that matters, and it is fragile as spun glass. This world, so rigid in its structure, offers a different kind of certainty than the anxious fluidity of modern life. There are no dizzying heights to strive for, but perhaps also no crushing falls from grace. Your place is set, like the stars in their courses. The anxiety is not about becoming, but about enduring. Ask yourself, in a world where the horizon of your life is fixed before you even draw breath, is there a strange comfort in knowing your path, even if it's hard? Or is the weight of predetermined fate a heavier burden than the pressure of limitless, often unfulfilled potential that hangs over lives today? They didn't dream of castles, only of full bellies and quiet breathing in the night. What does that tell us about the cost of aspiration? You step back now, pulling away from the straw-filled hovel, the smoke stinging your eyes, the gnawing hunger that was a constant companion. Step back from the aching muscles, the pervasive low thrum of fear, woven inextricably with faith. Look upon this life you have just briefly inhabited, so alien in its rituals, its dangers, its sheer, unyielding physicality, and yet so deeply, profoundly human. The medieval peasant's existence, stripped of our conveniences, our layers of digital distraction, and intricate societal systems, was the fundamental human condition laid bare. It was the relentless, moment-to-moment physical struggle against the environment, the cold that could kill, the rain that could drown a harvest, the wolf at the edge of the woods. It was absolute, non-negotiable reliance on community. Your survival literally depended on the hands that help you raise a beam, the neighbors who shared a precious loaf when your own stores failed. It was the potent, often chaotic, blending of deep spiritual belief in a divine plan with a pervasive tapestry of superstition, a knot tied just so to ward off the evil eye, a prayer whispered over a sick cow, believing fully that demons lurked in the swirling fog. It was the humbling, often heartbreaking, acceptance of a fate largely outside their individual control. The whims of a lord, the arbitrary sweep of plague, the caprice of the weather. And yet, within that relentless struggle was the profound, irreducible human capacity to find moments of fragile joy, deep connection, and quiet meaning. A child's laughter, a shared ale by the fire, the breathtaking beauty of a spring thaw after a brutal winter, the sheer relief of a successful harvest, celebrated with exhausted, grateful hearts. They faced tangible, immediate, existential threats that we, perhaps, can barely comprehend in their rawness. The failed crop meant starvation. The wandering wolf meant a child lost. The sweating sickness meant swift, terrifying death. We face different anxieties today. Financial collapse, social isolation, existential dread, the creeping threat of climate change. Are we truly, fundamentally different? Have we evolved beyond these core struggles for security, belonging, and meaning? Or have we simply built elaborate, dizzyingly complex systems and distractions, cities, technologies, economies, to shield ourselves from the raw reality of those ancient fears, rebranding mere survival for a technological age? The echoes of their lives resonate if you listen closely, a persistent, low thrum beneath the noise of our modern world. A reminder of what it truly means to be human when stripped back to basics. Imagine their calloused hands, roughened by soil and wood, still reaching out year after year, pushing seeds into the cold earth despite the crushing uncertainty, despite the overwhelming odds, despite the vivid memory of past failures. That is the insight, the capacity for resilience, for a quiet, determined hope, for finding sparks of meaning and purpose persists, stubbornly, even in the face of overwhelming adversity and severely limited agency. Human nature, at its core, is defined by its astonishing ability to simply endure and to create tiny, flickering sparks of light in the deepest darkness. What are the core, irreducible elements of your human experience? What ancient fears still haunt you, lurking beneath the surface of your modern life? And what forms does hope take for you today? They feared the devil's breath in the wind, felt the chill of mortality on their skin with every cough in the next hut. But still, they planted in hope. They had no legacy carved in stone, no names remembered by history books. But every seed they planted, every weary furrow they turned, every prayer they whispered in terror or gratitude, every quiet act of love and endurance built the world we now inhabit and often take utterly for granted.